So, we gonna get into the story about, someone I really cared about, you know what I mean? You know, baby girl named Dizzy. Dizzy was, real special, so, yeah, I do just follow the story, man. So anyway, Dizzy, you know what I mean, she was from Dallas, you know what I mean, born and raised. She was real nice in basketball, you know what I mean? She learned how to play basketball because of, her older brother, her brother who was like 2 years older than her, taught her how to play basketball. So she was nice, you know what I mean, on the court. She was, known for being nice, on the court. Far as the crossover, the handle, shooting the three, no look passes, all that. They called her Lady AI, you know what I mean? For Allen Iverson, they called her Lady AI because, she played like Allen Iverson even though she was a girl. And she got the nickname Dizzy, because she would do like a no-look pass or a fake pass and the person would spin around or she'd cross them over at all they're stumbling for. So that's how she got the name Dizzy. AKA Lady AI, right? So, she went off to college like around 17. You know what I mean? She was real smart. She went off to college like around 17. She went to Texas A&E University, but she got kicked out at 19, you know what I mean, for smoking and selling weed, you know what I mean? But before she got kicked out, of college, you know what I mean? Like I said, she was nice in ball, so she played against like Caitlin Clark, she played against Angel Reese, you know what I mean? And each time when she would play against, like one of them, she would have 25 points or more, you know what I mean? 10 assists, you know what I mean? 8 steals, shit like that. Like her numbers was crazy whenever she went against like Angel Reese or Caitlin Clark, like whenever you said that somebody was better than Dizzy, she would show out on that court, right? But she wound up getting kicked out of college, you know what I mean? Because of, she got caught for, not only smoking weed, but selling weed, people, ratted her out, because they ain't want to get kicked out, so they said, they told them where they got it from, So being that Dizzy was selling weed on campus and smoking weed, she got kicked out of college, so now she's back in the hood. Nah, man, at 20 years old, she's back in the hood. And, she was doing things like selling weed and pills to the strippers. Boosting out of stores. Dizzy can get you whatever you want, you know what I mean? She'd break into cars and, get whatever you need out of cars and shit, so one day we in the hood, she's playing ball and shit against Flame and a few other niggas and, she busting their ass, she killing them, busting their ass, threes, taking it to the basket, all that. So, her and Flame would crack jokes on each other. She would call Flame Pippi Longstockings because he was light-skinned with freckles and red hair. And he would call her She-Man, you know what I mean? Because even though Dizzy was, real tomboyish and always wore, like, basketball shorts, t-shirt, or tracksuit, and kept cornrows in her head. Even though she was, like, one of the guys, she had a real pretty face, you know what I mean? But I always suspected her as, like, one of the homies, So, she, always trying to get out a dollar, so, she sold platinum, some weed, you know what I mean? And, she was showing Flame that she got a few, like Versace glasses, Gucci glasses, that she boosts. And she, she said she broke into, like, some, there's, like, some police officers that live in a nice neighborhood. She said that, she broke into, one of their cars one time and found the gun and sold it. That's when I said, yo, I said, if you come across another, cop car or car with some guns, bring them to me, you know what I mean? Because you could use them shits and get rid of them, you know what I mean? So she said, bet. So cool. So as time go on, Dizzy, Dizzy winds up getting locked up. She got caught for trying to like break in the cars and shit. So, I felt obligated to, to get out. So, of course I had 88 reach out and try to find, where she was locked up at. So, 88, found her, I bailed out or whatever. So when I bailed out, I picked her up from jail, you know what I mean? So, told her, yeah, I felt like I should bail you out being that, you was breaking in the cars. I know you was breaking in the car to try to find shit from me, you know what I mean? So I felt, the needing to, bail you out. She said, cool. She told me when her court date was. I'm like, all right, cool. I was like, I had a lawyer on deck, because, Farrago always kept lawyers on deck for us. So as we driving, I'm actually, where you want me to drop you off at, you know what I mean? You want me to take you to your girl house. And that's when Dizzy said, what? I was like, your girl house, your girlfriend. She was like, I ain't gay. And I was shocked because Dizzy said she ain't gay. I was like, I assume you're gay. And she said, yeah, you know what happens when you assume. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I was like, so what you, when we take you home, and then she told me, she lived with her moms, but she tried to avoid going home because her mother's always preaching to her. Because ever since her mother found God and got baptized and changed her life around, because her moms used to, be in the streets and shit, you know what I mean? And has different baby daddies and shit, you know what I mean? She was like, her mom's is real religious. All her mother wanted to do was preach to her about the Bible and, changing her life around and always bringing up the fact that she got kicked out of college and she had a chance to make it in the, in the league, you know what I mean? And always throwing her brothers, a little bit of success in her face because her brother made it to the league in Europe. He plays in Europe. He plays overseas in Europe. And every little bit of money he sent back home, the mother donates to the church, you know what I mean? So she tries to avoid going home as much as possible. She either stays at a friend's house or she'd go get a hotel room somewhere to avoid her mother. So I said, well, you could stay over at the condo at my crib, you know what I mean? You always have been like one of the homies. So I was like, it's nothing, you know what I mean? So I was like, you could stop and, get a change of clothes at, at your house and then, go over to my crib and could chill by me until your court date and figure out what you want to do, you know what I mean? So she like, cool. So we pull up to, to her house, where she live at with her moms. She noticed her mother wasn't there, so she ran up in there. Got, I guess, a change of clothes or whatever she needed. She came back in the car, so now we driving. So I'm like, you hungry? What you want to eat? Like, my treat, whatever. So she was like, she wanted some Spanish food. You know what I mean? So I'm like, cool. So we driving. So I'm asking her, like, whatever happened to her pop? She said, her pops, Abe wasn't really around, you know what I mean? Because he was already married. When he got with her mother. And, he ain't want to, embarrass his wife, or whatever, ashamed of, I guess having a baby with another woman. That's why her father ain't never come around. So I'm like, all right. So we go to like a Mexican restaurant in Dallas, you know what I mean? So while we in the Mexican restaurant, the waitress come over, I order my food, what I want. Then when Dizzy ordered her food, she started speaking fluent Spanish, like straight up Spanish. So I'm like shocked. I'm like, so after she ordered her food, we give the waitress the menus. I'm like, yo, Dizzy, how you learn how to speak Spanish? That's what she said, her father's Ecuadorian. Her mother's, Black American, but her father's Ecuadorian. And that's why he ain't come around because, he's Spanish, his wife was Spanish, and I guess, he ain't want his wife to know not only he cheated and had a kid, but it was with a black woman. But how she learned how to speak Spanish was her father's mother. Her father's mother felt like, Dizzy has to be here, so she treated Dizzy like, like her, her grandbaby and the rest of the kids. It's just that Dizzy, was basically black, So by her being around her grandmother and her other cousins, that's how she learned how to speak Spanish. So I'm like, yo, that's dope, that's fire. So, we eat our food at the Mexican restaurant, we leave. Me and Dizzy go back to my spot, to my crib. So I'm like, yo, man, make yourself at home, I got plenty of rooms, whatever. I showed her, yo, you can stay in this room, whatever, so cool. So Dizzy, she's in the spot chilling. I'm in the spot chilling, so I go on and take my shower for the night before I go to bed, Dizzy goes and, she takes her shower and, whatever say, everything's good, we just chilling, So later on that night, had to, I won't wake it up in the middle of the night, I had to take a piss, so as I'm, coming out to go in the bathroom, Dizzy is about to walk in the bathroom, but Dizzy just got on a bra and a thong, and I just got on my boxer briefs. So it's like we both stopped in the hallway and we stared at each other for a minute. And Dizzy had like a banging body, even though she was slim. She had like a banging body. You could tell she worked out. She had the six-pack stomach. She had, muscles in her legs. She, had a little ass on her because, because not only she played basketball, she ran track. So it was like, damn. So, and I'm there, muscular, I work out 6 days a week. Boxing briefs, woke up in the middle of the night, so my dick is already harder than a motherfucker, so I'm like, shit. So she like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm like, nah, you go ahead. So she goes in the bathroom. Then I go in the bathroom, I go back in the room and lay back down. So as I'm laying back down, probably like 10, 15 minutes later, my bedroom door open. And, I always keep one under the pillow, just like Eddie Murphy did in Harlem Nights, so I, pull my gun. And then, it was Dizzy, she stopped. So I'm like, Dizzy, what up? And then she, she ain't say nothing, she just walked on the other side of the bed, got in the bed, laid down with her back towards me. So I'm like, alright. So I put, my gun back on the pillow. Woke up in the morning, Dizzy's laying there. She rolls, she turns around. And now she's, laying with her head on my chest and shit, now mind you, Dizzy already said she's not gay, so I'm like, okay, so, one thing led to, another, I woke up, hard dick, she woke up, I'm pretty sure pussy wet. Boom, we get it in for the first time. Boom, having sex, boom, 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 getting in, having sex. You know what I mean? Had sex, a few times that day, So now, me and Dizzy just chilling in the crib, So, Platinum and Flame come by. So I'm like, oh shit, so, we both get decent. And then, Platinum and Flame come by, they like, what up, nigga? I'm like, what up? So they're like, yeah, so what's up? Platinum, you go straight to the refrigerator. Flame, walking over to the couch in the living room, you're like, yo, what's good, man? And then they hear noise, so they're like, who that? I ain't say nothing at first, I'm just like, nah. So then Dizzy come downstairs, they're like, yo, she got on like a t-shirt and like, some boxer briefs and shit. So they're like, yo, so, that's when Flame like, let me find out you messing with she, man. I'm like, yo, chill, my nigga. And then that's when, she cracked a few jokes to Flame and Platinum. So she went back upstairs, and then that's when I told Flame and Platinum, I was like, yo, Dizzy's not gay, right? They was like, she's not gay. I'm like, yeah, she's not gay. And then that's when Platinum looked at me, Flame looked at me, they said, no, you didn't knock down, you ain't knocked down the homie she, man. I'm like, yo, stop calling her that. They laugh at this shit. I'm like, listen, man, I was like, I'll meet y'all niggas on the block later, man. So I basically kicked Platinum and Flame out and told them I'd meet them on the block later. So later on, me and Dizzy get dressed. We head out to the block, because now, I wanted to keep her out of trouble until her court date, so she chilling with me until her court date comes, so boom, her court date come around. So I'm sitting in the court, and, I'm waiting for her to be called, I got the lawyer on deck. lawyer, he did his research on her. He's gonna bring up the fact that she was in college, played ball, against Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and how they made it and how she got the potential to make it. How she learned basketball from her older brother who's in Europe. He sent in a statement, because he's big over in Europe, So, so they called, her real name was Claudette. So they called Dizzy so, the courts called Dizzy, they said, Claudette Valletta Smith. That was Dizzy's name, Claudette Valletta Smith, so they called her in. And it was a female judge, a black female judge, which was lucky, even though Dizzy was selling weed and stealing our car, the shit. She's never been in trouble. This is her first time ever being in trouble. So I guess the judge, not only being a black female, I guess she took pity on Dizzy, the fact that, they both, females, they both black. So she told Dizzy, she said, look, she said, I seen, you done a lot in your life, as far as like going to, college and playing ball, against, certain people who's now in the league. She was like, I don't know what it is about you, Miss Smith, but she said, I see something great in your future. And she said, being that this is your first time ever being in trouble, she said, I'm going to give you a break just like somebody gave me a break when I was around your age. She was like, you're 20 years old. You're going to be 21 soon. She said, I'm willing to throw this case out if you promise not to be back and not to ever come back into my courtroom. So, of course, Dizzy said, yeah. So that's when the judge told her, she was like, yo, she told her, go be great. She was like, go back to school, get your life together. She was like, cause I see you doing great things. So that's when she threw the whole case out. Boom. Cool, so now we hype, So now, we back, we head into the hood and shit. So boom, so we get to the hood. Platinum and Flame and the rest of the crew. They, there's a dice game going on, They playing dice, Platinum Flame, the rest of the crew, and this nigga Lil Ronnie, Shout out to Lil Ronnie, Much love to Lil Ronnie. Lil Ronnie, he was a shady character, but he was always cool with me. So they rolling dice, Platinum Flame, Lil Ronnie, couple other niggas. So after the dice game, Lil Ronnie hype, he see me like, yo, cause he ain't seen me in a minute, so, we shook hands and shit. He's showing me love. I'm like, yeah, what up, what up? I introduced him to Dizzy, He's like, what up? So that's when Ronnie was like, yo, let me talk to you. To the side, Tony. So I'm like, alright. So I moved out, I went to the side to talk to Lil Ronnie. Lil Ronnie like, yo, man. He was like, that Mexican plug I got, why I be buying all the weed from and shit. I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, you talk about the nigga Gus Rivera. He was like, yeah. He was like, Gus just got picked up by ICE. He was like, he's in ICE custody, So they most likely probably gonna be deporting that nigga soon. But yeah, ICE just picked him up. So, long story short, he was saying how he wanna go hit the spot up, being, he was like, for a fact, not only they got, pounds and pounds of weed in there, but, he was like, he know the money's in there. So I'm like, well, if Gus is locked up, who's one of his spot, he said his nephew Manny. He was like, his nephew Manny, speaks a little English or whatever, but, he's still doing business with his nephew Manny until they figure out what they're gonna do with Gus, Gus Rivera, who's now in ICE custody. So I'm like, yo, if we gonna run up in a spot, we can't just run up in a spot. I think we should all gain the trust, like, kind of like, rock him to sleep. So I was like, yo, I think you should, keep doing business with them, but but introduce him to Dizzy. That's when I wanted to, bring Dizzy into it. And that's what I told him, Dizzy knows Spanish and English. At least that way, if she go in there, she could learn the spot here, if they saying anything, maybe she could pick up on something. I was like, I want to bring Dizzy in. So he was like, all right, cool. So I called Dizzy over, told her the plan. She said she was with it. So he said he got two niggas he want to bring in to it. These two twins named Eddie and Teddy, Eddie and Teddy, they would know they was born in Dallas, but their parents was Jamaican. And what was interesting about Eddie and Teddy was, they could be talking like Mo3 or Yellow Beasley. They could be talking like that, and then switch their dialogue to be talking like Shopper Ranks or Bounty Killer. Like that was ill about Eddie and Teddy. They was black Americans from the hood. From Oak Cliff in Dallas, but they could talk like Jamaicans back in Jamaica and Kingston in the drop of a hat. But I was kind of skeptical of them because I didn't really know them, but they was known for robbing shit. It didn't matter if it was a liquor store, a motherfucking gambling spot, trap house, wherever the money was at, Eddie and Teddy was coming to get it. So I'm like, alright, cool. Platinum and Flame, they really know Ronnie like that, so I couldn't bring them in. So I'm like, alright, cool. So it's us five coming up with the plan. Me, Dizzy, Ronnie, Eddie, and Teddy. Cool. So we start going with the plan, So one day Ronnie, he's going to make his weekly purchases or whatever. He takes Dizzy with him. So at first they couch chat, they like, who's this? And that's when he explained to Manny, which is Gus' nephew, like, yo, she gonna be making purchases with me because I'm gonna have to go out of town, whatever. He made some type of excuse. So they made purchases, and next thing you know, Dizzy, she goes a few times to make purchases, but the whole time she going, she's learning more and more shit because they speak in Spanish, but they don't know Dizzy knows Spanish. All they see is a black girl with cornrows dressed like a boy. So she's learning shit. So every time she cut back, she like, yo, they got the weed over here. The nigga with the gun is over here. The money's over here. She's telling us everything because she's learning, because she knows everything. She knows Spanish, so she's learning the spot. So for like a month and a half, Dizzy is, after a while, Ronnie ain't even had to go buy, no work for them. We was sitting Dizzy, And being that Gus was locked up, and Gus needed the money to fight his case, That's why they kept doing business. So we come up with the plan. So now, Monty, is faking like he's out of town. So Dizzy is making the purchase now. So we come up with the plan to where, Dizzy goes in there. She's making the purchase, but then she says, yo, I gotta go get the rest of the money. I'll be right back. So then she comes back out. And then that's when me, Eddie, and Teddy running behind her. Of course we all, ski masked up, hoodie on, gloves on. So when they open the door, we push in, guns out. So, So we already knew where the gunman was, so we on the gunman, boom. Manny, he ain't have a gun, boom. So I got the gun to Dizzy. So Eddie and Teddy, they talking in a Jamaican dialogue, which is good, to throw them off and make them think that Jamaicans are robbing them. So that's when, Eddie, he puts the gun to Dizzy. He like, yo, he's saying it in Jamaican slang. He was like, yo, today, your lucky day, Bum McClyde. He was like, get the fuck up out of here before we kill you. So they let Dizzy go. We acting like we let Dizzy go. So Dizzy, she leaves, runs off, dips off in a hiding spot. So Eddie and Teddy talking that Jamaican slang, They took the gun from the gunman. They got him face down. They got, Manny face down. They got another Spanish, lady. She's face down. So now we want to do the spot. Open the safe, I'm going to the safe, going to the safe, going to the safe. So as I'm, filling up the bag with the money, I look up, this nigga Teddy lift up his ski mask because I guess being that he got everybody face down, he figured, so I'm like, yo, what the fuck you doing? And then that's when I'm like, so he pulls his mask back down. He was like, he's talking his Jamaican slang, talking about his height. I'm like, motherfucker. Like, So he pulled his mask back down. So I filled up, the bag with the money. Eddie, he grabs all the weed, like 200 pounds worth of weed. Boom. We get up out of there. Boom. So as we driving, Dizzy comes out the bushes. She hops in the car. We all take off. Boom. Clean hit, So Ronnie, comes through the spot. So we counted it up. It's a little over 250,000. So 250,000. 5 people, we each get, 50,000 apiece. Nice little hit, So I got 50,000, Eddie and Teddy got 50,000, Ronnie and Dizzy got 50,000. Boom. So we all agreed, to lay low, not to be too flashy or whatever. Cool, of course, with them niggas. And went in one ear and out the other, but Dizzy being that she with me, we laid low, we laid completely low. Whatever. Of course, word gets back to Gus Rivera, so he comes back, he calls home, he's livid about, who robbed the spot. And that's when I guess, Manny, told him about, the Jamaicans running in there. They put the gun to them, the girl, they let the girl go. And so Gus thinking, that it's something's fishy. So, what we didn't know, it was a hidden camera. So Manny, pulled the camera. Gus told him, that about the hidden cameras and to check the cameras. So when they check the cameras, they see this stupid motherfucker Teddy lift up his ski mask for a second. You know what I mean? So they trying to figure out who it is. You know what I mean? They don't know, but they got this screenshot of Teddy lifting up his mask for a second. Cool, boom. So now, while they dealing with that, Ronnie, he's more getting into gambling, spending money, shooting music videos and shit. So they trying to figure out, how is Ronnie, not only still shooting music videos, and they basically trying to see where they're getting all this wealth from. But they like, well, maybe it's not Ronnie because Ronnie shot music videos before with money, so they ain't thinking. So little to what we knew, that, the Mexicans, Gus Rivera, his nephew Manny and all them, they had other black clientele. So when these other black dudes was coming to cop weed, just like how Raleigh would, they wanted to ask him a question, so they showed, the video and the screenshot of Teddy's face, and that's when the dude was like, oh, he was like, that's Teddy, that's one of the twins, they told, Manny how they know him for robbing shit, and that they real cool with Robbie. So that's when they started putting two to two together. So that's when they hired these same black dudes that said, well, if you couldn't, get whoever's involved, he was like, they gave them a hefty price. So they like, alright, so now the black dudes are now stalking everybody's Instagram. So they see Ronnie shooting music videos, spending money. They see Eddie and Teddy done went and bought, matching watches. They done bought, a car and shit. Me and Dizzy, we low-key, because they heard about me and Dizzy being there, couldn't know, doing their research, you know what I mean? So the only thing me and Dizzy did was I bought some floor seats to the Chris Brown concert, the Breezy Bowl, you know what I mean? That's the only thing I did. I bought some floor seats for the Breezy Bowl and shit. So, me and, me and Dizzy, we get dressed up for the Breezy Bowl. Little to, our knowledge, the Mexicans are on us, you know what I mean? So as me and Dizzy, we getting ready for the Breezy Bowl, this is the first time I seen Dizzy without the cornrows. She let her hair out. She got dressed up. She fine as fuck. So we go to the Breezy Bowl. So we having fun, taking selfies at the Breezy Bowl and shit. You know what I mean? Chris Brown had this song called It Depends. So I'm, filming her on the phone with the other girls. I was at the concert. They doing the dance together to the It Depends song, to the Breezy Bowl, right? So, having fun. So somehow the shooters catch up to Eddie and Teddy. So what happened with Eddie and Teddy? Eddie's driving, Teddy's in the passenger seat, so they driving. It's this lady driving slow, you know what I mean? From what I'm hearing, from witnesses, he's honking his horn. This lady driving slow. Spanish lady, she driving slow. He honking horn. They stop at a light. Another car pulls up behind them, and another car pulls up to the driver's side and lets off like at least 60 shots. Da-da-da-da-da-da. You know what I mean? Hitting on Eddie and Teddy up, Swiss cheesing them. Because not only the passenger is letting off shots, someone in the back seat, in the passenger side also is letting off shots. So Eddie and Teddy's getting hit up, but it's a car parked in front of them. So then that's when the old lady drives off, and then the shooters, they drive off. and the car in the back makes a U-turn. So Eddie and Teddy, they did it. So now, but, I didn't hear nothing about that, because like I said, I don't know Eddie and Teddy. So, me and Dizzy chilling. Somehow, like I said, the Mexicans found out that Ronnie's connected to Eddie and Teddy. They now did. So now Gus Rivera calls this nigga Lil Ronnie. He's like, yo, I'm real disappointed you broke my heart, what you did. I always treated you like a little brother, and this what you do to me. So, of course, Ronnie's, he's denying it. But Gus is like, don't play with you. He can't really tell like how you want to talk. He was like, yo, he said, only thing I need to know. Because he was like, I know, your moms go to church every Sunday. He named the church. He was like, I know your daughter well, She goes to, same school, he lied and said, because, he knows that, ICE police is listening. He was like, I know your daughter go to this school. He was like, yo, man. He was like, just let me know who was dead. And then he hangs up the phone. And then that's when Manny calls. And then that's when, I guess he had to confess that he did it, He told everybody that was dead. Eddie and Teddy's already dead, So Eddie and Teddy's already dead. So he was like, who else did? And that's when, he told them that, me and Dizzy was dead, So they said, alright, cool. So I get a call for Ronnie. Ronnie like, yo, we gotta meet up. It just sound like important. So now I got Dizzy with me every day, cause now we dating and shit, sex, hustling together, we on some Bonnie and Clyde shit, kinda like how me and Sexy Trapper used to be, right? So cool, so I meet up with Ronnie. He's paranoid as shit. So I'm like, what up? He was like, yo, they on to us, man. I'm like, what you mean? He was like, Gus know who robbed the spot. He was like, Eddie and Teddy got killed, me the other day. I'm like, what? I was like, I ain't hear nothing about that. He was like, yeah, Eddie and Teddy got killed. And, they on us. He was like, I had to let them know. I was like, what the fuck you mean? I had to let them start pulling my gun. I was like, he was like, listen, man. He was like, they threatened to kill my mother. He was like, I had to let them know. But he was like, yo, if I was really trying to set you up, would I be letting you know that they come to get you? So that's when, Dizzy's looking at him. I'm looking at him. I'm like, fuck. And he was like, yeah, man, he was like, they on us. He was like, yo, just leave town, man, just leave town. So I'm like, all right, cool. So that's when me and Dizzy, we leave to Atlanta, we go to Atlanta because, already Sexy Trapper out there. And by this time, Sexy Trapper brother is home. So I had Platinum and Flame escort me to the airport, make sure me and Dizzy got there safe so we can get to the airport. Boom. So, get to the airport shit. We make it to Atlanta. So now we laying low. Sexy Trapper and her brother, they get us, a car so we can move around the city and shit. So meanwhile, we chilling, We laying low, cause they know that they on to us, Eddie and Teddy's already dead. And now they looking for us, So we chilling or whatever. Cool. So we was like laying low. Me and Dizzy was laying low for like a good month and a half, Almost 2 months and shit. So Dizzy was adamant about wanting to go out. She was like, yo, we've been, in Atlanta laying low. She was like, yo, we need to get out the house. Plus, I want to celebrate. I'm like, what celebrate? She was like, she'd tell me what the celebration is later. So she was real adamant about going out. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go out later. So she said she wanted to run some errands, so she wanted to call. I was going to go to the gym. So, I had Sexy Trapper, come pick me up to take me to the gym. And I left the car with Dizzy. So, Sexy Trapper takes me to the gym, I'm working out. And, Dizzy, she's running errands, doing whatever she had to do. So, as I'm doing that, I get, I get a call, cause what apparently happened, Dizzy, after she runs her errands, when she pulls back to the Airbnb where we lay low at, where we hiding at, somebody's mowing the lawn across the street, you know what I mean, somebody's mowing the lawn with a big straw hat, you know what I mean, a bandana, you know, tied around their face, and they mowing the lawn. Looks like a little Spanish dude, you know, Dizzy ain't thinking nothing of it. So when she gets out and she goes into the trunk, I guess to get whatever out the trunk, whoever was mowing the lawn, they run across the street. They start firing shots, pop, 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 firing shots, firing shots. Dizzy gets hit, you know what I mean? They shoot Dizzy down. Boom. You know, they hit Dizzy. So, after the person shoots, you know, Dizzy, they take off, you know what I mean? They get out of there. So I get a call saying, yo, you know what I mean? We went through, you know, it was like the hospital. They were saying that, yo, we went through, you know, Claudette's phone. She had you stored on the hubby. So we wanted to call you, let you know that, you know, Claudette's been shot. I'm like, what's been shot? She was like, yeah, been shot. I'm like, where? There was like somewhere in her body. She's in surgery or whatever. So they told me what hospital, you know, she was at. So me and Sexy Trapper run to the hospital. So that's when, you know, the police is there. They questioning me because I don't want to talk to the police, and they telling me about, you know, the footage that they seen because somebody's house had cameras, you know what I mean? And it showed the person mowing the lawn. And then when Dizzy went in the trunk, they ran up, shot Dizzy down, shot her up. But the person who owned the house that the person was mowing the lawn, they said they didn't have nobody mowing the lawn. They don't know who that person is, because apparently that couple or that family wasn't home. And so they don't know who it is. So I'm like, fuck now, of course I'm not going to tell them about how we robbed, you know, the cartel and shit, you know. So I'm just like, fuck. So now, Dizzy shot up, Eddie and Teddy's dead. So I guess, you know, little Ronnie, you know, I guess he figured, you know, he was good with, you know, with the cartel. I guess he figured he was good with Gus and the rest of the cartel, being that they already got Eddie and Teddy. They done shot motherfucking Dizzy, cause I let him know to text that Dizzy was shot, spoke to him on the phone. So I'm guessing he thinking, you know, everything's cool. So unfortunately, little Ronnie was with his daughter. He goes to the car wash. So as little Monty is at the car wash, two dudes, you know, that they hop out of a white car. This is up in Forest Hills. Two dudes hop out of a white car. They run up on Ronnie. They chasing Ronnie. They firing shots. They fire shots at the car. I don't think they knew that his daughter was in there. Fire shots. Boom, 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 boom. You know, unfortunately, they killed my little Ronnie and his daughter, his 5-year-old daughter. Rest in peace to both of them. Love you, Ronnie. So they killed Ronnie and his daughter. So now they done killed Eddie and Teddy, and then killed Ronnie and his little daughter. So, you know, but I don't think they knew the little girls was in there. So that brought so much heat and attention, you know what I mean? That, you know what I mean? I guess the contract on me was at a standstill, or they couldn't fulfill the contract on me because they done killed this little girl, and now the attention's on them, you know what I mean? So now, you know, they done caught 2 of the guys and shit. So, mind you, Dizzy's still in the hospital, you know what I mean? So, Dizzy, you know, is in the hospital in critical, you know what I mean? In critical but stable, you know, condition. So, of course, you know, she got all these tubes in her. And, you know, it was just, like, fucked up, you know what I mean? You know, Eddie and Teddy gone. Ronnie and his daughter gone. You know, Dizzy's, you know, who. And I felt bad, you know what I mean? I felt bad, so somehow, you know, some of the items that was in the trunk, you know, that Dizzy wanted to get, you know what I mean? The police come question me again. They showing me like she had like a card, you know, to let me know how much she loved me and all this shit. Then it was like a letter from like a community college saying that, you know, she completed all her courses online and that she graduated and that she, you know, received her diploma. You know, she did finish school online. So I'm like, damn. Then there was another thing that the police wanted to show me. there's like this jury box, so I'm assuming it's like a bracelet or a watch. It was like this, like a low box, but when I opened it, it was a pregnancy test, and it was positive. And when I broke down crying, crying, broke down crying. That shit fucked me up, you know what I mean? So, of course, the baby didn't make it, of course, what I mean? Because, she had to have been only maybe, few weeks pregnant, you know what I mean? Couple weeks pregnant, if that, you know what I mean? So the thing was, praying and hoping that, Dizzy make it, you know what I mean? So, of course, her brother comes down to Atlanta, you know what I mean? The mother, her mother wasn't that close, her mother's real overly religious, but her mother, sent her prayers. So me and her brother, we chopping it up, you know what I mean? We decided, step away for a minute, go downstairs, try to get something to eat. Cause Dizzy was in the hospital probably for about, maybe 2 weeks now. This is 2 weeks. So me and her brother step away to get something to eat. Her brother, what I mean, and me, we get a call on the phone telling us to come back, so we rush back. So they were like, yo, that, that she, flatlined about 2 times, and they brought her back. So they was like, yo, we gonna keep working on her, but, they said if anything, it's up to the, so that's when, her brother called the mother, and the mother, told him like, yo, if she flatlined 2 times, just let her be, leave it in God's hands, and they let her be. They pulled the plug, and she passed away, you know what I mean? That shit, I felt pain in my life before, but never liked the pain that I got from Dizzy, man, cause that shit fucked me up, you know what I mean? That shit fucked me up. I never really recovered from that, you know what I mean? It was like a dark cloud and a empty space in the city of Dallas for a minute, you know what I mean? Being that Ronnie was now gone, you know what I mean? Unfortunately, his daughter was gone. Dizzy was gone, you know what I mean? So, every year, up until, I got locked up every year on May 21st, on Dizzy's birthday, we will, do a basketball tournament in memory of Dizzy, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Also, give back, you know what I mean, to the kids, and especially, like, girls basketball teams and shit, you know what I mean? Even Angel Reese, you know what I mean, who played against Dizzy, even Angel Reese came through, and a few other girls, that knew about, Dizzy from college, and, you know what I mean, and heard about her story, came through. A lot of the, ladies from the WNBA would come through every year on May 21st on Dizzy's birthday and celebrate her birthday. And, that shit, she really fucked me up for a long time, man. For a real long time. Man. Rest in peace, Eddie and Teddy. Rest in peace, little Ronnie, and his daughter. And definitely rest in peace to Dizzy. I love you, and I miss you, baby girl.